Hey, what's happening everyone? Pragmatic Addict here. So, this is a very interesting one. I'm just gonna get straight into it. I have arachnophobia. So when the trailer dropped and I attempted to watch it on YouTube, I never finished it. I got like 20 seconds into that motherfucker and I tapped out. I was like, maybe if anything, if this plays as like a trailer before a movie at the cinema, okay, fine. Maybe I'll watch it. Funny enough, this actually did play in the theater one time. It was before my screener of Immaculate. But here's the thing. I actually wasn't that bothered by it. Maybe it was because I was in a huge crowd. I was in the very last row. But I don't know, man. I was fine with it. And not only that, but it actually looked like a lot of fun. Maybe there's just something about like watching it on my phone right next to my face where it's just a little bit too real. I don't know, man. But here I am paying $12 for a ticket to see Sting in its full runtime on the big screen when we got A24's Civil War playing. Don't say I don't love you guys. So the plot right here reads, Charlotte is a rebellious 12-year-old girl who finds a tiny spider in her rundown apartment building. She keeps it in a jar, but it soon starts to grow at a monstrous rate and develop an insatiable appetite for blood. As her neighbors begin to disappear, Charlotte and her family find themselves in a desperate fight for their lives against a ravenous arachnid with a taste for human flesh. God, that's a long premise. So I'm just gonna get right into this review. The first thing I'm gonna say about this film is actually a bit of a nitpick. So I went into this film expecting it to have some comedy. I don't know why, but when it comes to these like spider creature features, they all feel like they need to have a comedic element to them. Like, they can't just be like a spider horror film. It's gotta be funny, you know, whether it be like something like Eight-Legged Freaks. But the nitpick I have that I first want to talk about this film is actually revolving around the comedy. So the first scene that we get in this film has to do with this woman who has dementia and this exterminator. Now, what I'm going to say is that the exterminator in here, he is a good actor. He's also a good character. He's also a very funny character, but it's that thing where it's like the first thing that came out of this guy's mouth, the first line in this whole movie, out of the first character that we see, I was just like, oh, god damn it, really? He opens the movie up with this one-liner where immediately I was like, okay, so this is gonna be more of a horror comedy than it is gonna be like a campy horror film that is just self-aware, that has just like goofy stuff to it. No. The first line out of this guy's mouth is, hey, are you the bitch with a fucked up haircut? Yeah, I'm on my way. This is Frank the Exterminator. Just me being a critic, I'm like, that's not how you talk to customers. I get it that you're this comedic character already. I can already tell just by the way you fucking look. You're going to be that comedic character that everything out of your mind is just going to be some one-liner, some throwaway gag. And I just wasn't here for it. So just from that being like the first scene in the entire movie, I was just a little bit like nervous about this movie just going forward. Because I'm just going to say really quick, from when I actually did see the trailer, I was really excited about this movie because it seemed like everything was just going to be solid, appropriate, self-aware fun, where, for example, like this spider has this whistle that it can like communicate with the girl. And I was like, okay, well, what's up with that? How did it develop that? What's up with this bond between them? There's a scene where it takes a fucking baby through a goddamn vent that seemed to hint at like some kind of like a story point. You also get this like nerdy science team that's kind of like an outcast to the rest of like the tenants. When the girl's like asking him like, is it possible for a spider to grow this big? He's like, it's a physiological impossibility. And yes, just plenty of old people and animals scattered throughout the trailer. I'm like, that's just gonna rack up the kill count. Those are the only reasons why they're there. Also just like hints at like the horror where that one lady turns around, she sees the shadow of like what looks like a spider, but it's just a hanging plant. Also just the setting of this movie, with it being in a raging snowstorm, having that theme of like what reminded me of like Evil Dead Rise, where it's just going around this whole complex, just preying on all these different tenants. They have to like band together to fight this thing. It just seemed like a handful of solid, appropriate, self-aware fun. And just when I got this first line, I was like, but what I will say is that once this scene had concluded, when I saw like what kind of a scene it was as far as like storytelling, I was very invested. Aside from like the heavy use of like the comedy and like how weakly delivered it was and just kind of like throwaway it was, this was a solid setup. Just storytelling wise, the use of like cinematography, even already the teases at like the horror and everything here. I also really enjoyed the opening credits here. Just the whole aesthetic, it has that kind of throwback of like a classic horror story, like haunted house feel, and that's just kind of like how this whole movie feels setting wise, and just like with all the references and Easter eggs to like other classic like monster movie films, you can see that this film had especially like heavy inspiration from Alien, where like there's a lot of use of like going through vents in this film. There's a lot of specific references that you're like, that was ripped off like right out of Alien 3. It felt to me like Evil Dead Rise meets the movie Cobweb, that both came out in 2023. So maybe those were both huge inspirations to this film as well. But another thing that caught me off guard as well, which this is just a really disappointing thing, was just how fast and how kind of just nothing the whole introduction of this spider really was. Like, for example, how it has this like chirping noise. A big thing about just the trailer in general was just how much it seemed to be selling me on, you know, uniqueness, like as far as the teases at the horror. As a spider movie, why does it grow this big? Why does it have this chirping noise? There was a lot of teases to things that really felt like this is going to be a campy, self-aware, unique enough spider creature feature. And when I saw what inspires it to make this chirping noise, I was like, okay, that's fine. Like, as far as like having some context, great. But it's never really made a big deal or really like even clear why certain nonsensical things happen, as far as like certain things that I thought were gonna make this film unique that I was teased with in the trailer. And I get it, like the whole thing with this movie, this giant spider being an indie film, all the callbacks to everything that I saw in the beginning, which I did think was fine enough and like tongue-in-cheek enough, which I kind of expected. Regardless of just how silly things are going to be in general, at least have some reason why this film's story and the film itself is the way it is. This just felt like it was a film where they wanted to make this film for that reason, being a giant spider horror film. They wanted to have unique elements, but they didn't really want to work for them, and even worse, used all of those unique elements in the trailer to sell people on that trick, where sadly that is actually just the extent to like where all these things went. Now I will say, as far as the characters in this film, there is somewhat a solid hand at humanity here. First off, all the characters, or at least a handful of the main characters, it is like one family just under the same roof in this apartment. We got a mom, a stepdad, a 12-year-old, and a grandmother who has dementia. So already these characters, just like in general, they are written in a convincing enough family dynamic manner. They're not dumb, they're believable, they're not overdoing shit at first, they're not assholes at first. So immediately with them being the characters that we're gonna be following and being a solid enough, believable enough set of characters, I was down with that. But with that being said, it also makes me that much more bummed that the rest of this film is just kind of throwaway, and other important aspects that were totally within reach were just simply ignored. Like, regardless of how solid the acting and the characters are in a film, it is that thing of like, the characters will have something solid going for them, and then it'll shift to this spider POV, which isn't a bad thing, but how it changes when it chooses to change and how abrupt and quick these shifts come and go, it just felt very rushed. In and out of the movie, I just kept getting this feeling as far as like pacing where it felt more appropriate to like that of a short horror film that you see on like YouTube from like Crypt TV or something. There are a lot of characters, but they have little to no real introduction. There is this spider, this antagonist, that has little to no real introduction. And before you know it, these people are people in a spider creature horror film, and this spider is just a giant spider hunting these fuckers down. Which again, sounds nice, but these people, they're written well enough when the film tries. And when we're teased with unique things in the trailer about this spider, you see what could have been a more stable, genuine, cared for film, and it just makes it feel like you're watching half of what this film could have been. You know, the uniqueness, the setup, all things within reach, all things that were selling me on this film, all things that seemed promising, and it just felt half-assed, and it really makes no sense as to why it feels this way. It just has no excuse. Even more so because of how rushed the film feels and lacking with introduction or background and how many characters there are. There were some characters where, like, regardless of how solid their characters were or like the acting was, it did feel a bit cramped. Like the film included what could be solid additions, but everything else, because it all felt incomplete, it was that thing where I was like, you gotta finish one job before you go to the next. It's that thing of like quality over quantity. You can't just have like a bunch of different characters that are half-assed and expect them all together to make one full picture. It doesn't work like that. It just makes the film look more cramped and just makes me have a bigger issue with it. Another thing is that while the characters don't have a huge introduction, and the film already tunes in and out of them, and like this whole spider very sporadically without warning or reason. Eventually I did get tired of it, because when it would tune back into the human characters, which is much more than the spider gets, I'm just gonna say that. I know that sucks to hear, I know that might be a little bit of spoiler, but just a little bit of a heads up, I feel like people would want to know that. It is just like family drama over and over again, where it was that thing where I was like, okay, it's fine at first, because at the time it felt important, it felt cared about. But when you see this same thing just over and over and over again, with like barely any monster movie stuff yet, that by the time certain people's deaths do happen, you're just not really invested anymore. You just don't really care for them or like want to root for them, and it just falls into that category of like throwaway character deaths and a throwaway creature feature. And it just makes you not even want to bother with what you thought were the solid aspects of this film. By the time the movie really becomes this killer spider movie, these characters have already done a whole like 180, or they've just recycled the same scenarios, and you're just watching the killer spider kill these people, and you just have that feeling of like, for what though? Why am I here now? Like, I don't care about these people. The movie's almost over. Everything else at this point has kind of been ass. I will say though, there are still like imaginative enough story points where things will happen, and how they do with what they choose to show, as well as like setting wise. This film is pretty creepy with that. It's fun for what the film is, as far as like what it's given us up to this point. And this is pretty much the end of the movie, so I think I've said all I want to say about Sting without giving you guys any more potential spoilers. But yes, guys, that is going to do it for my review of Sting. Do you guys plan on seeing this film? If you guys did see it, let me know what you thought of the movie, as well as my review down in the comments below. But with all that being said, guys, that has done it for my review of Sting. I will see you guys in the next one very soon. I hope you're all having a great day. Thank you guys as always for watching.